Let's talk about JSON and YAML formats. If you know these formats well, feel free to skip this lesson. So in the root of this project, we're going to add a new file called data.json. Now, JSON, as you probably know, is a language. It's a human readable language for representing data. So in this JSON file, we can have an object or an array. Let's say we want to represent a course. A course can have properties like name, price, and so on. So in this object, we can add one or more key value pairs. Our keys should always be surrounded in double quotes. So we can add a key called name and set its value to, we can use a string, the ultimate Docker course. Then we add a comma to define the next key value pair. So we can say price. We can set this to a number. Now the value can also be a Boolean. So we can define another key value pair and set the value to true or false. We can define another key value pair and set the value to an array. So we define an array using square brackets. Now in this array, we can have any valid objects. So we can have strings, numbers, booleans, or other objects. So I'm going to add a couple of strings, let's say software and DevOps. And one last key value pair, author. I'm going to make this an object. So once again, we use curly braces to define an object. In this object, we add a couple key value pairs. First name is Mosh and last name is what? Hamedani. And yes, I am Iranian. I get that question all the time. All right, so here we have a JSON file. Now let's see how we can convert this to YAML. YAML is another language for representing data, but it has less clutter than JSON. It's easier to read. So I'm going to copy all this code. Here in the project, we're going to add a new file called data.yaml. The extension can be YAML or YML. Now, on the top, we add 3 hyphens to indicate the beginning of a YAML file. Then we paste our code. Now, in YAML, we don't use curly braces to indicate hierarchy. This idea has come from Python. If you have programmed in Python, you know that in Python, we use indentation to represent hierarchy. So we don't have curly braces. So let's get rid of these braces and remove the indentation. Good. Now, the next thing you need to know about YAML is that we don't have to use quotes. So we can bring up the replace dialog and replace all these double quotes with nothing. That immediately takes a lot of clutter away. Also, we're not going to use commas to separate key value pairs. So on the top, we have name, price, is published. Now, how do we represent a list or an array? We use hyphens. So I'm going to remove this. We press enter. Add a tab on a new line. We type hyphen to define the first item in the list, software. Then at the same indentation, we add the next item, DevOps. Now, author is an object, but as I told you, we don't use curly braces, we use indentation. So because these two properties are indented, they belong to the author property, okay? So this is our YAML file. Let's compare this with JSON. As you can see, YAML is easier to read and understand. Now, why don't we use YAML all the time? Well, because parsing YAML files is a little bit slower than parsing JSON files, because the parser doesn't know if this is a string or a number. So it has to read everything as a string and then try to evaluate it. In contrast, in JSON, strings are represented using quotes and more specifically double quotes. So the parser knows that this is a string and it shouldn't evaluate it, okay? So quite often we use YAML files for configuration files and JSON for exchanging data between multiple computers, like a client and a server. So now that you understand these formats, next we're going to talk about compose files.